So first of all, I want to say thank you to the leadership of this congregation for inviting me to come here today, and also thank you to all of you to come to hear what I have to say and to be a part of this congregation. This is the first of a series of 11 sermons. I've been asked to do a sermon on the first Sunday of each month this year, and I've entitled this series Opportunities. Opportunities for a congregation of liberal religious people in covenant to make a contribution to the life of the 21st century. I have to confess that I'm in the activist part of the church. I got interested in becoming a part of a church back in the civil rights era. I went to Chicago Theological Seminary because they were involved in the contemporary issues of the time. And I continue to have a deep passion that it's people like you and I that have the opportunity to make a significant difference to the world. And today, what I want to do is set a big context, and then I want to look at parts of those opportunities in the coming months. And I have a special idea for the last service at the end. But I just got back from India. I periodically go to India. I visit a school for tribal children there. So most of these kids' parents are functionally illiterate. And this year I took with me 6 college students from Guilford College, and then a guy that went with us last year who just graduated. And we spent a lot of time meeting kids who've graduated from the school and trying to ask what can we do to help you guys get into the 21st century. And one of the things that struck us most is the kids were saying to us, we do not have anyone to turn to for guidance. And when I think of other people I've talked to, one of the key questions in this part of the 21st century is, where do you turn for guidance? Because many people are questioning a lot of stuff. The institutions, many of the books we read. I'm not sure television always helps me figure out how to get into the 21st century. So we have a big issue, in my opinion, that a congregation like us of liberal, religious, covenanted people can make a significant contribution. I want to look at why right now. For me, there's 3 big issues that have changed the framework for things in the 21st century. The environment, interconnectivity, and the scale of the human presence on the planet. Everywhere you turn, environmental questions are on people's agendas. In India, where I just was, pollution is just hugely a problem. I mean, people have to wear face masks to ride their motorcycles down the street because you can't stand the pollution. Trees are dying. Whatever your example, environmental concerns have got to be on our agenda. And the second one is, second, interconnectivity. When I first went to India in 1984, telephone, of course, getting in touch with anybody was just a massive problem. If you wanted to find my friend VJ, you had to walk into town and wander around town looking for him, and finally you would find him. And now I just get on Skype and call his number, and I say, hey, VJ, where are you? And he'll tell me, and we'll decide when to talk. And even the kids at the school, so at the Chickley school, the number of kids with cell phones is absolutely overwhelming, and a lot of them know how to use it better than some of us do. we had a professor with us, and the kids were showing her how to, well, you just put the two phones together and they talk to each other. How? Well, like this. Everybody, the young people, especially in the world, know how to communicate with each other far better than you and I. Than I, certainly. And then the third thing is the massive scope of human presence on the planet. I do not think we can underestimate the fact that the billions of people, the sheer number of the billions of people that we have on the planet is a new situation that has never before occurred in human history. And if you just ask to pick anything, transportation, housing, you simply cannot build a 5,000 square foot house for every person on the planet. There are not enough bricks. If your definition of a house is 5,000 feet, you can't house everybody. Whatever little example you pick, the scope of human presence on planet Earth requires new thinking. Now, the thing is, we cannot go backwards. The idea, you think, well, man, I remember back in the old days when everything was nice and comfortable and we just knew everybody and we were all friendly. Well, those days of a little town, first of all, the little town wasn't all friendly, but second of all, we can't go back to a little town. Even the little town is connected to the internet, and whatever the 20th century, in my opinion, in many ways, the 20th century was driven by a massive manufacturing engine that produced tons of stuff. But how many of you in this room are going to buy 2 more television sets? No, we're not going to buy more stuff. I mean, my house is full. Let's just, if I buy anything else, I got to take something out of it. And that's true for a lot of us. The manufacturing engine that built the 20th century has run out of gas, and it cannot be revved up. That's my opinion. And the third thing is that there's no place left to go. It used to be if I didn't like you and I didn't get along together, then I'd try to convince you just to leave. And but there's no place, and you could go, you'd go out into the woods and you'd start your own community out there, but there's no place else to go. If I don't like you here, then you got to go to somebody else's town because somebody's got the town. Anyway. I think the alternatives that we face today are to make some kind of, I wrote down, power play to maintain the past. We can try to force old ways to stay relevant, or we can admit that we have to do some rethinking and rebuild the foundation. And I'm of a mind that rebuilding the foundation for the long-term future of the planet is the way we have to go. And that's what I want to explore. That's why I think a group of religious liberals are the people to do that kind of work. And that's what I want to work on in this series of sermons. So what do I mean by a liberal? I want to look at liberal, I want to look at religious, and I want to look at in covenant. And I want to watch the clock. So liberal, what I mean by liberal is someone who's willing to listen at deep levels, I wrote, to the wind and to deep wisdom. And that's to try to find new ways of hearing and seeing what's going on, as opposed to taking old interpretations and standing on them just because somebody that was smart said it was a good idea. As I'm an ordained minister, and the word is around that I can do weddings for people. every now and again I get a phone call from somebody who wants me to do a wedding for them. One Thursday I got a phone call from a girl who said, can I do a wedding, her wedding, in 10 days, a Saturday the week next? I looked at me, yeah, I can do it, but man, that's pretty close. I mean, I'm trying to think, is this a shotgun wedding or what's going on here? But she said, no, we'll talk about it when I get there. So she came over, she and her fiance came over, and they explained that they've been planning their wedding for 2 years, and that his mother had said that she would take care of organizing the minister. And so the previous Saturday, they had gone to see the minister. And he had said, as they were going through the service, well, since this is a Christian wedding, we'll read from the Christian Bible, and we'll read the part in 2 Timothy where it says, women will obey their husbands. And she said, no, we're not reading that. And he said, well, no, it's a Christian wedding. We're going to read from the Christian Bible. That's what it says. And she said, well, I broke into tears and I left. I walked out of the room. And my fiance couldn't figure out what to do. And now here I am talking to you. And I said, well, first of all, let's just say that doesn't go in my house. We don't read that in my house. So we'll find something else. And you can try to reinterpret and parse the words and all that kind of stuff. But that's, for me, I mean, there's a whole bunch of examples. But no way can you interpret, in the 21st century, a man will tell a woman, all women, what to do. That's not going to fly, dude. And so we have to figure out some new ways to interpret profound understanding. And that's our important task as liberals, to be willing to say, don't get me wrong, I am not anti-Jesus, I'm not anti-Bible, I'm not anti-Islam, I'm not anti-Buddhist, I'm not anti any of that stuff. But if you take every single word and try to beat somebody over the head with it, you are unhelpful in the 21st century. And the bigger problem, but therefore what that does is that calls into a question a lot of things that people were standing on. Because, well, shoot, the Bible says it, so it must be true. Now I know something to stand on. But you and I, as liberals, have to find ways to re-articulate how to name what it is that you can stand on. Because it's not just that you can do whatever you jolly well please. That is not how life works either. There are some rules, and there are some best practices, and there's some other stuff. But we have to re-articulate that for the 21st century and figure out how to do that. I think we got to work on three kinds of things. We have to work on new images of what it means to be successful and effective. We need to work on new rituals that allow us to interrelate to each other in a creative way, and we need to work on new stories that carry what it means to be a human being in the 21st century. And part of the problem for me is that most of the things you hear people tell you, I have to do hard work to interpret what that means. From advertising on television to fairy tales. And all those things are part of what we have to find new ways to make sense of reality in the 21st century. Now I'm moving to religious. Why do I think religious people, like this group of religious people, have an important part to play in the 21st century? First of all, I want to say what I understand religious to be. I want to separate spiritual and religious. Now, the problem with spirituality is that when I have a spiritual experience, that is beyond words. It's a category that's quite different than building a house. A spiritual experience and a construction project are two different kinds of things. Religion is the way that spiritual people communicate with each other about their spiritual experience. And at that point, religion is vitally important, because it's one thing to have a spiritual experience. It's another thing to have that spiritual experience in a community of people and to communicate about it. And there are ways to communicate about spiritual experiences. And you can help people on their spiritual journey. But that takes language, that takes stories, that takes relating experiences, and spiritual experiences cannot be described in words that are the same as the words you use on, as I said, on building construction. My mentor Thomas Berry taught me. He said that he taught me about the word metaphor, and he said spiritual experiences require metaphorical language. And then he asked me, what's the opposite of metaphor? I didn't know. He taught me a new word, univocal. Univocal language is the opposite of metaphorical language. And univocal language is like red rose. So if I tell you there's a bunch of red roses in front of me, you can come up and we can sort out red. If you talk to my wife, she can sort out shades of red, but we're close enough on red and rose, and these are not daisies. And we can have, that's a univocal conversation. But when I talk about my spiritual experience, I have to talk in metaphor. It was like this. And then you can have your conversation. And one of my deep friends in India, part of why I like to go to India is because most of my friends there are Hindus. And that means they have a different set of metaphors for talking about their religious experience than I do. And I can't get away with code words that I use around here. But we have to learn to have a conversation, metaphor to metaphor, and then we can look at results. And that's an important conversation to have. And in the 21st century, a religious group of people like this, our work on talking about our spiritual experiences is critically important, because we need new ways to carry that conversation. Finally, I want to talk about covenant. This group, this congregation says that they're a congregation in covenant. And that's an important aspect to probe deeper on what covenant means. Elaine and I lived for 20 years as a part of a covenanted community, a self-consciously covenanted community. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out about covenant. And covenant is different than contract. I have a contract with this congregation. They said do 11 sermons, and you got to get the title to us this time, and you got to get the hymns to us then, and we can measure this, you know. That's a contract. I also have a covenant with this group to participate honestly, and I read the covenant, but you measure those differently. Those are a different category of relationship. And human beings show up in covenant all the time. When you're born, you establish a covenant with the planet. You're not here on contract. It's not exactly clear what your relationship is. And figuring out, in my opinion, how this congregation can become self-conscious about what it means to live in covenant, and how do you hold people accountable to being in covenant? Because you hold people accountable to being in covenant differently than you hold people accountable to being in a contract. Because a contract is all spelled out. It's a univocal agreement. There's so many sermons, they're so long, and this kind of thing. A covenant is a different kind of thing. You read that covenant today, that you read today. We can't go, there's not a 10-point checklist that we can measure, well, I got a 6, you know. It's not that way. Covenant is very complicated, and learning how to live in covenant is an important gift that this congregation has to give, and figuring out how to reinterpret the covenant that the human species has with the planet is the large extrapolation of what this is. And my simple example of that, not to pick, but so there's a place in the old scripture where they lay out God's covenant. And one of the things God says was, go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. Well, if that's the covenant, then I fail, see? Because I don't have any kids. And so then I get a 0. Well, I don't think I get a 0 in my relationship to profound reality in the 21st century, but we got to re-articulate what is the covenant? What is the human role in the 21st century? And some of the old benchmarks are beyond us. So I designed this to be the first, but I want to lay out the broad thing. I think that as liberals, we have to listen to the wind and the wisdom and reinterpret what's going on in the 21st century. As religious people, we need to find ways to be self-conscious about our spiritual experiences and help each other seriously and figure out what that means. And as people in covenant, we need to figure out how that is both an effective way to be related to each other, and how that demonstrates to the globe that we live in covenant with the globe. So the 21st century requires bold solutions, and it's people like this, like are gathered here today, that hold the key to the 21st century, and I look forward to continuing this conversation in the months and weeks ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. We ask for your support to grow our community, and